Hello and welcome to the Cyberden right here on Siren Radio with your host, me, Jake the Voice. And we have another lovely guest right here in the Cyberden. Please welcome professional composer Jesper Kyd, best known for his work on the Assassin's Creed, Hitman, and Borderlands series. Thanks for coming, mate.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Now, Jesper, let's start off with the usual bread and butter question. What inspired you to become a composer? Now, I've heard that you've been in those early days, you were spending quite a bit of time composing on the Commodore 64.
Yeah, I would say the Commodore 64 was a huge part of my, wanting to be a composer, especially for video games. I had been composing prior to that. We had a piano at home, and it seemed wherever I went with my family, everybody, aunts, uncles, there was always a piano there. So I would fiddle a little bit on those. And I've always been into just listening to music and singing in choir, practicing guitar and different things. But when the Commodore 64 came along, I think it put everything in perspective. Suddenly you were able to sequence your thoughts and your melodies and your ideas, and you didn't just have to sit and perform them. You could add drums, bass, harmonies, melodies, and push a button and sit back and listen to your creation. And that was super inspiring to me. And that really came from all the great music that the Commodore 64 put out. Obviously, thousands of games came out on the Commodore 64. But there was some of these games had absolutely fabulous music. And that was because the Commodore 64 was the first gaming device that actually had a real music chip. So this music chip was actually an analog synthesizer chip. So you could do things with that. You could create emotions. You could create atmosphere. Prior to that, it was all this beep beep music. And so suddenly this new world opened up for me, and I was just fascinated with this brand new music style that was being invented on the Commodore 64. It's called SIT music or chiptune, and that music style is still going today, which is unbelievable. But it was invented on the Commodore 64. And after that, after I got that machine, I started fiddling with music, and later I started on the follow-up computer, the Amiga, and that's really, I think, where things really took off for me. I became part of the European demo scene, and I've made hundreds of chip tunes on the Commodore 64 and also on the Amiga, and so I kind of taught myself, how to make music.
From humble beginnings indeed. So, do you perhaps have any favorite composers, artists, any other kind of people out there who you would consider to be inspirational as well?
Yeah, I was really inspired by the music on the Commodore 64 is probably some of the stuff that inspired me the most. Rob Hubbard. These are all British composers, by the way. Rob Hubbard, Martin Galway, Tim Follin, Ben Dailish. The unbelievable music, and such wonderful melodies. Because the Commodore 64, even though it had a music chip and you could do, you could do real music with it, it was still so limited that you had to focus on melodies. So if you had a great melody, a cool melody, a really like melody that stuck in your brain, that was all like part of, oh, that's a cool track. You couldn't rely on production like you can today. It was all about the melodies. So yeah, that's really a huge part of my inspiration. Other than that, what I was listening to at the time was also Mike Oldfield, for example, was a huge inspiration. Vangelis, Sham Shar. These were all like at the beginning of my career, huge influences.
Now let's get talking about a very, very famous and iconic stealth action IP, better known as, of course, Hitman. How is it that you first got involved with composing for the first Hitman game, and how was working on that very first game like? Because I remember when I was when I read the liner notes for the it's like the Hitman 1 and Hitman 2 Silent Assassin official soundtrack CD. I was quite surprised when I read it and I saw that you really didn't have a lot of a lot of information to kind of go with when composing that first soundtrack from from what I've read.
This is true. How that came about was I mentioned that I entered the demo scene after getting a Commodore 64. So I would start to make music with the Commodore 64, and I had someone who was always sending me like demos and games and stuff, and they sent me this music program. I started fiddling with it, and it was a really great program called Sound Monitor. And I just love that program. And I started sending some music to my friend, and he's like, "Hey, I'm in a demo group. We're gonna make a demo with your music." So they made like a music selector thing. And so, just real quick, like a demo is something where there's like programming, there's art, and there's music, and the programmers try to show off their programming tricks, their programming routines. We can do this, we can do that. So it's kind of a way to show off your abilities, and then the graphic and the design is what kind of drives the demo. And then you have the music, of course. And so I got heavily involved with the demo scene on the Amiga, especially. I started making music for a lot of different demo groups. And our first, and we became Silence Denmark. There's also Silence Sweden, which later became DICE, the Digital Illusions video game company. But so we were working away as Silence DK, and we met these programmers that was in a demo group called Cryonics, and they were some of the best programmers in Denmark. They were just totally next level, and we were known more for our cutting edge art and music. So we got together and we did a demo called Hardwired, which was really, I feel, a really groundbreaking demo. It showed the abilities we had when we all joined forces. And after that demo, we were like, okay, let's start a game company. We want to keep doing what we're doing here. We want to keep doing it together, and we want to make money doing it. So starting a game company was the next logical step. So we did some games together. Our first game got sold to Sega. It was for the Sega Mega Drive, and we moved to the US. We did some more games for the Sega Mega Drive and something for the Sega Saturn as well. So the last game we did for Sega Saturn, we won't pay for that. So there was a lawsuit. The guys went back home. 5 years later, we won the lawsuit, but at that time, everybody had moved on. I decided to stay in the US. They went back home to start the game company IO Interactive, and they started working on their first game. I felt like staying in the US because I didn't want to do one soundtrack every 2-3 years. And I also didn't want to be involved with all the sound effects and the dialogue and all that stuff. I wanted to purely concentrate on music. But so their first game was Hitman Codename 47. So yeah, it was an interesting experience. I didn't have a lot to go on. I had a lot of concept art I could look at to get in the mood of things. But other than that, it was a tricky soundtrack to write. It was a music system called Direct Music, which was this kind of database looking Microsoft, brand new music system that that we decided to use for the game so that all the music could switch instantly. It's these days, we have several of those kind of programs. We have Wise and Fmod and all these programs that does all that stuff really well. But back then, this was quite new. So there was just no way I could make music in that program. It was just so not a creative program like, today you work with Cubase or Logic or something, and these music programs are super creative and fast to work in. You can get your ideas down really fast, but not so much this program. So I decided to write all the music outside of the game and then work on converting it into this program. And so I think it turned out okay. It was a really odd kind of score to work on in that aspect because it was, again, direct music made things the way they were. So, but on on the next game, I got to go, how do you say, all the way, and all the limitations that was in place on Hitman Code 47 was removed.
So, how would you generally kind of describe the composition process for the Hitman soundtracks, considering how the first game was quite experimental, but then you started, of course, incorporating orchestral elements. There's Hitman contracts with the more of the electronic and dark ambience kind of mixed in as well with these sorts of things. Again, could you tell us more about the general composition process for these soundtracks on the whole?
Yeah, so coming out of the demo scene and also working on my first, I don't know, 4 or 5 game soundtracks prior to Hitman, I was known for someone who was doing a lot of electronic music. That was my world. It was melodic and everything, but it was definitely electronic. And when Hitman 2: Silent Assassin came along, it was really interesting because the CEO of the company, Janos Flosser, he told me, we want an orchestral soundtrack for Hitman 2. And I barely listened to orchestral music. I certainly had never tried to write any orchestral music before. It was such a foreign world to me. It was so far away from, my electronic music. But at the same time, I felt it was a really interesting challenge, and they were so convinced that I could do it that I just decided, okay, then I'll do it. And coming out of the demo scene and all that, and using these different music programs, there was never any manuals or anything for like any of these things. You literally just sat there and had to figure everything out on your own. And that's basically what I've done with my music as well. I'm used to figuring stuff out without any help. And I'm also, I've taught myself how to make music. So it was just another aspect that I needed to learn. That's how I looked at it. And I'm sure it helped me, because if I had known all the tips and tricks of how to write classical symphonic music, I might have been intimidated, but I was completely ignorant to all the rules and what you're supposed to not do and what you're supposed to do. I just wrote it the way I felt it should sound. So that turned into this really interesting score. And when I was in Budapest listening to the recordings as the orchestra and the choir was recording, I was like, oh my God, this is a whole new world. And I immediately just kind of had this epiphany. I need to do more of this music. This is definitely something that I find fascinating. And so when Hitman Contracts came along, it was back to electronic music. It was a really, really dark game, and I felt we needed to go back to the roots of electronic music for that one. There was really not a lot of there's really nothing heroic about that game. If anything, the anti-hero thing came out loud and clear on that one. And it really is Agent 47 sitting in his hotel room, being, he's wounded, and he's on all this medicine, and he's like thinking back on his journey and some of his experiences. So there was an opportunity there to do something really trippy and to do something really surprising, because we could always count on, Agent 47 just sitting there tripping out. And it gave, I think, the whole team a really interesting freedom to do something that was really, really weird at times too, but in a good way. And then Blood Money came along, and that to me was that was the fourth Hitman game. That to me was like a culmination of everything that is Hitman. So I really wanted it to be electronic, and I wanted it to be symphonic, but more and most important, I wanted the electronic elements to blend with the symphonic elements. That's not, like Silent Assassin, Hitman 2 is purely symphonic, and Contracts is purely electronic. I wanted to find a way to mix those two elements together, to come up with like the ultimate kind of Hitman sound. So that to me is what I ended my journey with Hitman on. The blending of those styles to yeah, those are the four Hitman scores.
Now, a little birdie told me that the soundtrack that you composed for I believe it was for Blood Money actually became before Contracts. Was that true or
Blood Money was epic in production, in scale, and everything. And that game took a long time to make. And I was actually working on Blood Money when Contracts started up. There was a lot of things they were doing in Blood Money that hadn't been done before, like the crowd systems, for example, where you could have hundreds of people on the screen. I mean, the Hitman also invented ragdoll physics in Hitman 1. I mean, it is known as a groundbreaking series from the perspective of programming as well. And of course, that's all the demo scene, tricks coming out and all that from people being in the demo scene and wanting to do something new and fresh. But yeah, so Blood Money took a long time to create, and it was interesting that Contracts just kind of came in, and I had to get to work on that project in the middle of Blood Money, and then went back to Blood Money.
so would you say it's been more demanding or more challenging or perhaps even more fun with the development process of working on the different entries in the Hitman series, or maybe a combination of all these things?
I mean, the Hitman series has a really special place in my heart, not just because it was made by my friends that I, grew up with and was in a demo scene with, and we kind of we've been through so much together already at that point. And we know each other really well. They know to get the best out of me, you got to let me experiment and all these kind of things, which makes it great to work with them. But at the same time, my music very much, how do you say, grew up or evolved, or I mean, my music style was still being created. I was so young when I did all this stuff that I was still trying to find out how to make music. And so there's all this really unapologetic inventions and searching for how to make music sound good. It was really it was really pure creative freedom in the most pure sense. And that will always be a really special part of my journey. I learned so much from working on Hitman.
There was one thing that especially surprised me back in the day when Hitman Absolution was released. That you weren't composing that. That sounded like absolute blasphemy when I heard about that news, and many agreed with that. Same with the World of Assassination series when they went for another composer chappie, but again they didn't call you back. Seemingly, what happened there? Do you know what happened exactly?
Well, the IO Interactive, the company founded by my friends, it was sold at that time to IDOS, and they all left the company after after Contracts, the beginning of Blood Money. And so it was a brand new team that started working on Absolution. And at that time, I was working on Kane and Lynch for IO Interactive. I've also done Freedom Fighters for IO Interactive, by the way. So I was working on Kane and Lynch, and after Kane and Lynch, there, this new team, they just wanted to work with their own people, I guess. I mean, that's how it came down. So yeah, I wasn't called. They, sometimes people just want to try new things.
Did that ever bum you out? Did you ever have any ideas for like future Hitman entries, or did you think, oh, well, that's just the nature of the business?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't really sit around. I don't really think about those things. I'm I'm sure that if I was to do another Hitman one day, that I would only do it if I could bring something new to the table. That's just the nature of the projects that interests me. But I really do feel that the Blood Money sound, we found something really cool there. I mean, I was inspired by opera music and classical music, symphonic music, all this kind of stuff. And I think I could definitely take all that further with all the stuff that I've learned over the years now. So, if there ever was to be another opportunity there, I would want to push it somewhere new. That's how I feel about all the projects I work on. I need to keep learning. That's what interests me about writing music. If I don't learn, then I feel I'm repeating myself, and it's too far away from who I am and what gives me joy. Writing music. I have to keep going in new directions.
And amidst all of these remastered soundtrack releases, being released on vinyl as well, all the Hitman soundtracks, amidst all of this, you've also been getting out there with a live orchestra, composing some of the most iconic tracks from the Hitman series live, and you managed to meet the voice of 47 himself, David Bateson, in person. So, again, could you tell us about your experiences with both of these things?
Yeah, I mean, it's really wonderful that this music lives on in the concert hall. Um, I mean, I wouldn't have expected that when we recorded it, that's for sure. But of course, once you do work with a symphony orchestra and a choir, there are always the opportunity of being able to perform this music. But I don't think we could have ever anticipated the popularity of these concerts and the way and how they've grown over the years. It was really wonderful to see David in Denmark. Also I also he was also part of a concert I did in Poland, the Game Music Festival, and he was also involved with that as a voice, because we did a full 45 minutes from Hitman. But yeah, it's really amazing. You're in this room, and all these people love the same things that you do, and they're gamers. Let's say it's an Assassin's Creed concert, they're super into Assassin's Creed, and it's just, there's an energy in that room that's hard to define, but it's definitely there. It feels very different from going to a classical concert, which I love doing. It feels very different from that. People are so into it. I see people tearing up during the performances, and it 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 does make sense from the perspective of perhaps hundreds of hours spent with these games, and then you hear that music live, and you not only hear it live, you hear it performed by a 90-piece orchestra and a huge choir. It's hard to explain, but if I always think of it like each musician is kind of like a speaker, right? And then you have 90 musicians spread out through the stage. Now we have 90 speakers placed throughout the stage. Then you have the choir, and each of those choir can be a speaker. Now we have, I don't know, 120 speakers, and that's just coming from the stage. Then you have the opera house itself, the actual room, which is designed for this kind of music. It's designed to reverberate around the room. So you take those 120 speakers and you send it out into the concert hall, and suddenly you have 4, 5, 1,000 speakers. It's just an unbelievable experience. You cannot describe what it sounds like to sit in an opera house designed for symphonic music, to hear a symphonic orchestra play. It's just impossible to describe unless you actually try it out. And I think it's such a amazing, rich experience that people haven't tried before. Many people haven't been in these opera houses before. So it's just a very powerful experience.
So, which would you consider to be your favourite tracks that you've composed for Hitman, for all of the Hitman games that you've composed for, of course? Which stand out to you as your personal top picks?
Well, that would probably be Apocalypse and Vegas. from Blood Money. Um, yeah, I Apocalypse is a it's a kind of a bold track that you know that plays when you are doing bad stuff or you've just done bad stuff and you are trying to get out of there without being discovered. It's subtle yet it feels very epic. It's that combo of being stealth, but at the same time your heart is racing, right? And you're trying to score this from the interior perspective of Agent 47. So even though he's super calm on the outside, I like to think that there's all kinds of things going on the inside. Um, and then Vegas is a fun track. I was really into lounge music at the time. It was this whole thing that came into the dance music industry around that time. I think 2005. Um, I guess it was all we have the hard rave music, and then you need to go chill, and so here's some lounge music to chill out to. And so Vegas really embodied that whole vibe. And when I hear that track, I'm like right there back in 2005. Yeah, those are my two favorites.
Now let's move on to the Assassin's Creed soundtrack. Could you perhaps tell us how you managed to get into this IP, composing for this other iconic stealth action series?
Yeah, so Patrice Desilets was really into Hitman, and he wanted me to demo for this new game that they were working on. At the time, it was like a Prince of Persia game. And there was ideas about having multiple composers and all these different ideas were being floated at the time. But they asked a lot of composers to demo for that. I think we were 14 or 15 people demoing. The team picked my music, and so I was up and running. I remember at E3, I was up in a hotel room and Raid and Patrice was showing me their early concept art of what the game would be able to achieve, what it would look like, what it would feel like, how it would play. And they showed me this concept art of a city and said, this is where you stand, but you can go all the way over there. And it was like way in the distance, this big city. And I was just like, well, nobody's ever done that. That seems impossible. I didn't know we could even do that stuff. So the way Assassin's Creed, I mean, when I finally saw that running, I just remember thinking, wow, they did it. They cracked the code on that. There's never been a game like this before. For me, it felt like a true next generation game. You see a lot of games today, but a lot of them came from places where like, yeah, this is like that, but it's better. This was not like anything. This was brand new. You could traverse the environment vertically. You could crawl these buildings. Nobody had done that. I was just so blown away by it, and so happy to be involved with that project. Even though Assassin's Creed 1 was a really tough game, it's probably one of my toughest projects I've worked on. There was so much we had to figure out, and the game was still evolving as I was writing the music. The team was trying to define it, but it was a hard one also because there were so many gameplay specific things that need to be composed. Music for eavesdropping, music for following people, and then all the other usual stuff, combat, tension, suspense, all that kind of stuff. And at the same time, there was 3 different cities that you could traverse, Jerusalem, Acre, and Damascus. And each of these cities had a different music style as well. So they needed all that gameplay specific music to be in those specific styles as well. So when you were in Damascus, you would hear only the Damascus inspired game music. It was a blast. But when the second one came around, I felt like, okay, we understood the game a lot better. And all those systems and especially how the animus would interfere with the music. What should that sound like? And the team was very keen on the animus really being a big part of the game. That was kind of what tied everything together. I mean, when you're running around the rooftops, there are something I call escape music. So we had escape low, escape medium, escape high, depending on how many people are chasing you and stuff like this. And it went into a completely electronic direction with electronic beats and everything. And the screen that you're watching is starting to tear. And the whole idea about that is that the animus is being pushed to its limits. And so that's where we go a little bit more sci-fi with everything. And then the rest of the score is more time period specific, and also a lot of um, um, like Middle Eastern instruments and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, but really a great joy to work on the first one and to be part of Assassin's Creed and to be able to kind of define what is the sound of Assassin's Creed.
A little side question I wanted to actually ask about, in particular, the first Assassin's Creed soundtrack, because there was a soundtrack release of the Assassin's Creed OST. The official soundtrack release had about, I think it was about maybe 12 tracks or something like that. But there was also like a promo kind of pre-release, one that's quite rare, difficult to find, and it had perhaps maybe probably about double the amount of tracks from there. I wasn't sure if those like extra tracks were used in the game, or were they like concepts that were kind of made during the development but not implemented. Do you know anything about that, or was it like the final official soundtrack release was more like a selection of the considered best ones?
Yeah. So the way that first of all, there's over 3 hours of music in the game. So yeah, that's the amount of music I wrote. And um the soundtrack only has like you say, I don't know. I don't even know. What is it, 45 minutes or something? I can't remember. But it only has a select few highlight tracks. Why it went down like that, I don't know. I just know that that ended up being the soundtrack, and I was of course hoping to get a full release. But that yeah, that didn't happen.
Let's get talking a bit more about the average composition process for the soundtracks for Assassin's Creed, and again throughout the entire series where you have been pulled in to compose. How would you describe roughly kind of the average composition process then?
The animus has a lot to do with my process when I have written my 5 Assassin's Creed scores. The way the animus comes in and distorts or modulates all the different live performances. There's rarely any live performances that are straight up. Everything has to sound like it's a little bit off and it's a little bit twisted. What's happening here? There's like an underlying subtle sci-fi element going through all of it. Um, and that's a big part of the process, especially for the Ezio trilogy. Um, I would say for Valhalla, my process changed. Valhalla is very different from the other Assassin's Creed games I worked on. They all took place in cities, and everything was more compact. Everything was busy. There was lots of people in the streets, lots of, everywhere you looked, there were things happening. Um, Whereas Valhalla, you're out in these vast landscapes, and it just very beautiful with the weather and everything is a totally different feeling. It's harder. The life is harder out there on the plain during the Viking era. And so the philosophy I took there was, well, everything needs to be grounded in live recordings. It needs to sound, everything needs to sound live. I didn't feel like a synthesizer really belonged in that score, in my part of the score at least. And so I acquired all these instruments from the Viking era, and also from from Britain, because we also go to Britain later on. We go from Norway to Britain in that score. And I started practicing those instruments, and eventually I ended up recording all the live performances myself. That was a first for me, so that was a lot of fun. And then I would manipulate them in the computer and on hardware effects and all kinds of stuff, to make it sound modern and to make it up to date. And that was my Animus filter that came in there. The fact that I manipulated everything with modern tools. So the Animus effect was done in a totally different way on that score. Um, and yeah, that's my approach. Those are the two approaches I've taken. I'm sure there's other approaches to take, but those have been mine.
Now, there's one particular track that has, of course, really stood out to the Assassin's Creed fan base, or perhaps just the world of video gaming in general, and that would be the track Ezio's Family. How would you describe the composition process for this particular track? Was it just like the same sort of composition process for all the other tracks, like for in Assassin's Creed 2, or were you trying to do something different here?
Yeah, I mean, Ezio's Family came from the track Earth, um, which is where that theme was created. And it had a lot to do with what happens in Ezio's life. I mean, Ezio's family, to me, is the process that Ezio goes through. His whole process, from loss to also the surprise that his father was an assassin, and of course the loss of his father and his brothers. And then, to me, there's also hope in there, that he is rebuilding himself as an assassin, and finally he's growing up. He's finding his destiny. And that's what I hear, right, when I listen to it. At the same time, the way the track is being used as the main theme for the entire Assassin's Creed franchise, all the assassins goes through these kinds of struggles. And so it becomes more of an universal struggle for all the assassins. So in some ways the track has evolved into that. But yeah, there was not really a place for us or a reason for us to record Ezio's Family outside of the fact that we really liked that track, and the team as well. And we felt, well, we have an orchestra we're working with, we should record this track, and they were totally on board with that. And that's where we ended up. We ended up putting in the opening of the game, and the end credits, and also when Ezio finds his father's assassin's uniform. That's also where the theme comes out. But the theme wasn't used a whole lot in the second one, but it just grew and grew in popularity, and until it became the theme of the whole franchise.
Now, when it comes to the composition process for the various different entries in the series, of course, with the different settings, the different kind of time zones, where the protagonist is, of course, climbing into the Animus, and then there are places like the Middle East, and then Renaissance Italy, Anglo-Saxon England, etc. How like talking about the settings of these games, how much has the settings of the titles kind of influenced the compositions and like the sound and the feel of the tracks?
A whole lot. I mean, absolutely. The setting is so incredibly important. I mean, we go and we hear about a whole new assassin in a whole new setting. I mean, I know the trilogy was 3 games with Ezio, but usually we go in a new place, in a new setting, and we can kind of push reset and start it up again in a new part of the world. I mean, for example, Assassin's Creed Revelations has a lot of uh, Greek music in there that again I had to figure out how do I make Assassin's Creed music. What does it sound like when we're in Greece? You know that, and that is one of the best things about working on an Assassin's Creed score is that you really do have to you have to go looking, and especially I feel I have to go looking because I started right. The first four scores are all my music, so I started that sound. So I feel like a huge responsibility that I need to keep reinventing that sound when I work on an Assassin's Creed game. Um, and so yeah, that was what I felt I did again for Valhalla. And you know, every new setting, it's so interesting to hear how these composers are reinventing the sound of a new setting.
How would you describe your experiences with collaborating alongside other composers? You know, for example, there was Sarah, I believe it's pronounced Sarah Schnashner with Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Again, getting to work alongside different composers and whatnot. How has it been for you?
Yeah, Sarah Schachner. Yeah, it on Valhalla we did work separately. We collaborated on the main theme. We both wrote that together. Um, Other than that, I often write my music on my own. I I like to, I like to flesh out the entire universe and what it should sound like from A to Z. Make a whole bunch of rules and limitations and try to create a soundtrack within that world. Um, so sometimes when you work with other composers, they have their philosophy of what that should sound like. And so you have yours, they have theirs. And I sometimes feel like if you have too many philosophies, it can end up making things a bit it doesn't it's not as precise the message that the music gives you. It if it's too much all over the place, then it can lose its impact. So I really like the idea of kind of masterminding the sound and then let's go, let's create this world. So I think I'm more into that side of it where I just like to be super creative and come up with this whole universe.
Now, which of the tracks that you have composed for the Assassin's Creed series would you consider your personal favourites?
Hmm. I really like Home in Florence from Assassin's Creed 2. Um, that one always makes me happy to listen to. And um, City of Rome from Brotherhood, I enjoyed as well. Um, the escape music, Access the Animus from Assassin's Creed 1. Um, yeah, those and yeah, no, I would say those are my favorites.
Now let's get talking about the Borderlands series. Again, let's dig up that usual favourite question of mine right now. How did you get involved with composing for this looter shooter series that so many people love?
Yeah, I was contacted by Gearbox. I think this was 2009 or something. Um, and they were looking for composer for Borderlands, and there was two other composers as well. At the time, they were called Chris and Sasha, and so it was the three of us working on that game. Um, Really cool game. None of us had any idea about. I'm sure we didn't successful this game would be. Um, I mean, the success of that game is phenomenal. I am especially Borderlands 2 just became ginormous, and yeah, the I think it sold something like 35 million units. I've heard. It just blows my mind. And again, Borderlands 3, a blast to work on. I've also done a lot of the DLCs, and I also worked on the pre-sequel, which was Borderlands in Space, and those DLCs for that title, Claptastic Voyage. So yeah, it's been a lot of Borderlands music in my career.
So how would you describe composing for the many entries in the series? I did read about, especially with, in particular, Borderlands, the pre-sequel, that you kind of went back to those kind of retro electronic and chiptune elements for that. But again, talking in an all-encompassing manner here, how did you kind of tackle the composition process for the many entries in the series?
It's, I mean, it's different. The pre-sequel, we get to go to a moon base. So that was hinted at in Borderlands 2. But when we finally got to go there in the pre-sequel, it just felt so amazing. And I knew I needed something really sci-fi sounding for that. We're on the moon, and so the whole soundtrack was created with that in mind, that it needed to sound like sci-fi, and at the same time, how do we make it sound like Borderlands? So there are different remixes of the theme. The theme from Borderlands 1, Crack of Eon, had a theme that became, it's not the official theme, but it's a melody that became quite recognizable within the Borderlands universe. And so I have like electronic remixes of that, for example. Other than that, it was about just getting the whole studio in sci-fi mode. And it is true, I do some retro sounding sci-fi as well. Borderlands is a fun universe. It's about having fun while you're playing it. It's got this comedy side to it that I don't have a score to that, but I make sure that a lot of the music is fun to listen to. It's not like a serious, dark, Blade Runner sci-fi world. It's a very free-spirited, over-the-top kind of world. And so the music is scored with that perspective in mind. While at the same time, in Borderlands 2, for example, there's a lot of desert environment. So there's a lot of acoustic guitars and acoustic instruments to represent that part of the world. And for Borderlands 3, I was I was scoring a planet that was inspired more by like the bayou and these like swamp, I don't know, swamp worlds full of like old crashed spaceships and different things. So there was more like a I don't know, swamp slide guitars and these kind of Louisiana guitars and all that kind of stuff. So you go where the game pulls you, and you make sure that environment is represented in the music, while at the same time you try to think as much as you can about what makes the Borderlands music, and try to get all those elements in there at the same time.
What would you also consider to be some of your favorite tunes that you have composed for Borderlands?
I think that would be the menu music for Borderlands 2 and the menu music for Borderlands 3. Especially the menu music for Borderlands 3. It's literally just called menu music. That track really kind of took off on YouTube and everything, and it was written as a kind of a, there's this big adventure and waiting, but you're not there yet. You're just sitting here on the title screen, but it's out there and you need to go play the game. So it has this huge, grand feeling of the adventure to be had, but at the same time, it's subtle because you're here. So there was this interesting dynamic, and I really downplayed everything about that track. I didn't try to make it sound big and impressive. It has very kind of subtle instruments, very low key, but it's full of melody. It's all melody. So that was a really interesting journey. You can't just go and write anything super epic on a menu screen anyway, where people are sitting and taking a moment. You don't want to blast them. You want to wait until you have like some epic combat moment for that. So that's how that was designed. But yeah, that's my favorite.
Are there any other kind of soundtracks that you have composed for, whether it's for video games or for television, TV shows, etc.? Any other soundtracks that stand out to you that you are especially proud of?
I mean, I really like Darksiders 2 was a lot of fun. I was able to they wanted the developer wanted a fantasy sound that hadn't been heard before. That was my brief. So I took that in an interesting direction, I feel, where I mixed fantasy and acoustic performances with electronics to come up with something that's new. Um, I also really enjoyed working on Tumbad, which is an Indian fantasy film. Um, it was well received. They were nominated for best film and in all the big award shows and everything. I was even nominated for soundtrack of the year and all the award shows over there too, most of them. And that's really interesting. So it did well in theaters, but once it was put on Amazon Prime in India, it just took off, and it's just become this cult phenomenon over there. Um, and it is a fantastic movie. It's nothing like I've ever seen. That is totally unique. So we are working on Tumbat 2 now. So yeah, Tumbat definitely has a special place in my heart. And I can't forget my Dark Tide, my latest one of my latest scores for Warhammer. That was an absolute joy to work on. I felt like um, so many things aligned on that score. I have been expanding my gear and my approaches to specifically handle that score, and done some major updates and rewirings and I don't know, ways to work with the sound I was hearing in my head, which, you know, I don't know, it wasn't even possible. I had to have someone custom build a few boxes for it to even be possible to do what I wanted to do. But once I got everything going, man, that I'm really happy with how that sounds. I think it sounds like nothing I've done before. And it sounds like almost, I mean, it sounds totally like nothing else out there. I think I can say that. It mixes my love of electronic music and dance music, which is something I've done a ton of, with live choirs. And it's just really blends it together in an unusual way.
Are there any particular sound? Sorry, let me reword that. Are there any other particular projects that you would love to work on? Any franchises, any TV programs or movies, anything of the sort that pops into your head where you would go, if someone told me to compose for this, I would do it in a heartbeat. What comes to mind?
What comes to mind? Uh, the Warhammer TV series, that would be fun to work on. I know Amazon is working on that. Um, I just I love going places that I haven't really done too much of. So let's see, what have I not done too much? I haven't done. I'd love to do another RPG, like a really deep role-playing game. That would be a lot of fun. Um, I also love working on film. My favorite genres are thriller, fantasy, sci-fi, that kind of thing. Um, and I feel like with all my work in video games, my voice in film is it's a bit different from most composers, and again, I think it's because of all the years that I've been working as a video game composer with basically complete creative freedom. I've really been able to look for my sound, find my sound, and fine tune my sound. So now it sounds, and again, in games, I keep working on new games that require music I haven't done before. So I'm always evolving my sound in games. But I do think when you put that in film and TV, something really interesting comes out. And I have a couple of film projects. One of them is almost done, and yeah, I can't wait to get more of my film music out there.
So, Jasper, would you consider yourself as a bit of a gamer with all of the video game soundtracks that you have been working on? Or are you perhaps a little bit too busy composing music to be playing the games that you've been making music for?
I mean, I am busy. I'm very busy, but I love video games. I am not going to stop playing video games. I try to, find time when I can, and it's definitely dangerous because as soon as I start playing, I'm just completely hooked. Um, I especially love Subnautica, and Subnautica Below Zero. Those two games are probably my favorite type of open world game that I've played in a while. Well, that's not true. I like all kinds of open world games, but those games really clicked with me because usually open world games are not vertical, This game is vertical. So Subnautica is all about going down into the ocean. And the better you get, the further down you can go. So in some ways, it's extremely terrifying game to play, because there's always a big ocean and some surprises down there waiting for you. But it's a very unusual way of creating an open world game. So yeah, that's probably my favorite game at the moment.
Artificial intelligence, AI, that's definitely quite a bit of a hot topic these days, quite a bit of a hot potato, you could argue, especially when it comes to not only things like writing and voice acting, but especially music. Being a composer with many, many years of experience under your belt in the video game scene, especially, what are your thoughts on AI being used to make music?
I used to say this thing, you can't teach a computer to have a bad childhood. But you know what? I'm starting to rethink that because maybe you can. You probably can't. It's all about what you feed it. But everything you feed it comes from somewhere else, and it's not to say that if I write a score, it also comes from somewhere else, right? If I grew up with my Goldfield, I'm sure that's part of my DNA somehow. So it's a very difficult thing to define, but I do think that if you're working, let's say you're working on a film or a game, as an AI, you don't, I mean, you need that personal relationship with the director so that when you write stuff, he can say, not quite, but maybe this part right here. And then you go and you do something with that part. And he's like, oh, wow, let's do this now. All these surprises, all these conversations lead you down new paths. And you cannot just feed that to an AI. And you cannot just, I could just imagine how difficult it would be to give an AI like revisions and stuff like this. And also, if someone is working on a big project, they would want to hire, if somebody is doing a game and they want to hire me, I'd like to think that they would hire me to for my creativity and for my, process. And why would they try to save a few bucks to hire an AI when they're spending all this money making this big game? It doesn't compute to me. But where I do see it making a lot of sense is like a new director or maybe an indie studio saying, we don't have money for music, but we need 10 hours of music or something, or even like, it's one person with his camera in the mountains, and he's like, he's using an AI to write the music. That perspective is intimidating because there is a possibility there to bypass the composer, which is a shame, right? Because when you look at a lot of great, horror movies, I'm into horror movies a lot, and like Nightmare on Elm Street or something, and you hear about the money they paid the composer, and you're like, holy cow, he just did this because he loved that movie. There is an opportunity. There are opportunities where people do things, and you do this project because you believe in it. It doesn't have to be, oh, we can save money with AI. There's other ways to pay people, and suddenly you're on with this director working on his next movie. There's just a lot of good reasons why it shouldn't all be a financial decisions, but I feel like AI is becoming that. It's all about, well, we can do all this stuff for free. um that's a shame. So, but then again, I get AI, and these, I'm working on some next generation games right now where I can see that they're using AI in the game to control some of the systems, and it is mind-boggling what they're able to achieve with this stuff. So AI definitely has a place in the universe. I just think we need to be careful about it, because when you see AI create graphics, well, where did what did you feed that AI, And more than likely it was fed with all kind of copyrighted images. So it's hard to say, can you tell what you fed that AI? Is there some kind of it's a huge discussion we need to have, and maybe there should be some limitations on AI. Maybe they should, have things that are illegal, and what's the repercussions if you break those laws? There's definitely a lot happening that we need to have like this discussion about, and yeah, those are my thoughts.
When you're not composing for all sorts of different kinds of projects, how do you like to relax?
Well, I love to travel. I love to see new things. Love going to concerts. Love watching movies. Love reading. Love reading comic books as well. And just always trying to find new ways to rewire my studios to do things that I don't know, in an unusual way. There's so much musically that we haven't done yet, and there's so many new ways to do things using equipment from all kind of eras, especially the 70s and the 80s, where music equipment was all about, how can we make the ultimate instrument? And costs wasn't even, an option there. It was just like whatever. Size wasn't even thought about. Now, right now, it's very much about, is it, can you take it on the go? Is it cheap? Does it emulate certain preset sounds of old analog synthesizers as well? Sure, it does all that. But then when you sit with an analog keyboard from the 70s and you do things you're not supposed to do, that machine will give you so much mileage, and it will just keep going on and on. And all that data that's in those sounds, when you put that into the computer, you can just keep processing and processing because it's so rich. But when you get like a modern instrument that's done with a budget in mind, and that just have computer chips inside that are trying to emulate instead of being the real analog, the data you get into your computer from those are just so limited, and you can't keep processing. You're looking at something that's just missing all the warmth, and it's just emulating. Yeah, I think a lot about that. I think and at the same time, I have a huge modular synthesizer, which is the cutting edge of music. um yeah, so that's kind of my world.
Jesper, let me just say it's been an absolute blast finally getting to chat with you. Thank you so much for coming on board the Cyberden.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, man. This has been really fun.
Glad to hear that. So, anything that you would like to say to your many, many fans and admirers out there?
I just want to say I am just so thrilled that the appreciation for video game music seems to be going through the roof these days. I just came home from Denmark, well, I came back from Denmark, um, where I was part of 4 sold-out concerts at our biggest symphony house in Denmark. And it just seems there's so much love for video game music these days, and I just appreciate that so much, that we get to express all that music in these fabulous venues around the world. So yeah, let's keep pushing that.
Let's keep pushing that indeed. But anyway, I would personally like to thank all of my wonderful listeners out there for tuning into another great interview right here on the Cyber Den. So Jesper, thanks again, and I'm looking forward to that next project you'll be working on, whatever it could be.
Thank you. Hey, this is Jesper Kyd speaking. You may have heard my compositions for Hitman, Assassin's Creed, Borderlands, and many other games. Keep listening to Jake the Voice on the Cyber Den.